on this episode of the Everyday Rose Show, part 2 of my conversation with Michael Marriott. Welcome to part 2 of my recent conversation with Michael Marriott. And in this particular one, we covered a lot of material. Seriously, a lot of material. I'm going to leave these cards up for you, basically, that way you can take a look at them. These are timestamps. I've arranged this episode like a chapters in a book, basically. So the timestamps is like your page reference. That way you can jump around, see what you want to see. You can see it in bits and pieces if that's what you want to do. We covered a lot. We had sort of an idea of what we're going to talk about. But, you know, Michael and I have known each other for over 20 years. I knew the conversation was going to range all over the place. I just let it go, knowing that I could basically do what I did here and break it up for you guys. One other thing, like I said, this is part 2. You don't have to have seen part 1 in order to watch part 2. You can go back and watch part 1 after the fact as well. So like I said, we got a lot to get to, so let's jump right in. So, Michael, let's jump right into planting, and let's jump right into the one that people absolutely go crazy over. You'll see this debate at all the ends. The bud union of the rose. Do we bury it or do we not bury it?
Oh, definitely bury it.
Yes. Yes. Can we just put this chestnut to rest? I mean, bury it and give me your 2-3 good reasons to bury that bud union.
Well, I don't know if it's what you call it over there in the States, but we call windrock, where if it's planted too high up, because the rose branches out from sort of a single root, as it were, a single stem. If you plant it high, then the top bit, that's right, it sort of just wiggles around. And
yes, the shank here, and then that's all that's supporting it.
Yeah. So if you plant it too high, it wiggles around. But if you plant it deeply with the base of the stems about 2 or 3 inches below ground level, then it makes for a rock solid plant, because roots are then encouraged to come from the base of the stem, so it doesn't move. And then the plant can choose whether to grow roots from the base of the stems, which might actually make it a better plant in the long run. So
I've had a lot of roses that actually will do that. They revert to their own roots, is what we call it. Yeah. By burying that bud union. And I'm the same thing. Windrock is absolutely a case too. And if you're in a cold, hardy climate, freezing. Yeah. You know, you want that bud union protected. You don't want it exposed to, below freezing temperatures.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I've heard in some people in the really cold parts of the States, they bury them up to 6 inches, the bud union up to 6 inches below ground level. But the other thing,
you got to get a below freeze level in the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. But the other thing is that was I heard somebody did, and I don't know if this is widespread at all, is that they actually buried it at an angle. So if you bury it 6 inches below ground, the roots are going to be in some fairly rubbishy soil, really, going to be really into the subsoil. Whereas if you plant it at an angle, if that's the bud union there, I don't know if you can see it. So then the roots are still in sort of pretty good, in good soil. But then the bud union is still several inches below ground level, 3 or 4 inches below ground level. And then the stems, of course, will just grow up vertically as soon as it starts growing. So you get the same effect, but without the roots being in really poor soil. So
I've actually never heard that one before, but that makes all the sense in the world. Yeah, get it into the good soil, and so I think so. Let's just lay this one to rest. Bury the bud union. Do not bury it. Bury the bud union. Don't bury the bud union. Michael Marriott says,
bury the bud union.
says, bury the bud union.
Yeah.
Case closed. Discussion over. We're moving on. brings the next question. You talk, a lot of people say you should trim the roots before you plant. Maybe some, yeah, I see, I see your face right out of the gate. Well, some people say, well, what if it doesn't fit in the hole? Well, dig a deeper hole. But you just mentioned, though, planting at an angle to keep it in good soil. That could be a way to basically make sure you keep those roots good and long as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I sort of compare trimming the roots, like saying, okay, we're going to start training to be an Olympic sportsman, and we'll start off by starving you for a week. You know, so see, we'll just trim the roots off, because you don't need all those roots, you know.
No. Yeah, welcome to the low-calorie Olympics here.
So the only time you might want to trim the roots, and even then I think it's very doubtful, if they're damaged in some ways. So, but even then I think...
yeah,
you know,
I mean, if you've got a root that's broken and it's hanging, then yeah, you might want to clean it up a little bit or something like that. But no, I mean, leave as much roots as you possibly can in that situation. Yeah, and I like your idea, you know, plant it at an angle if you have to. I mean, that makes, because I mean, I live in Carolinas with red clay. I mean, I amend my soil, I can dig deep. There's a point where, you know, I'm going to need small explosives to basically dig a hole. And so I've got to be a little bit careful with that. And so, yeah. So you have to plant the roses far enough apart so the air can move through them. Because we all know air has a magic quality. It's a fungicide. Did you know air is a fungicide? It eliminates black spot. It eliminates powdery mildew. It eliminates rust. Get some air. It's a wonderful thing to have. I mean, I know you have a complete...
What you do then is you end up with a lot of bare soil, and there's a sort of rose there, and there's a rose over there, and there's a rose over there, and it's, you know, it's sort of the odd blobby bit with lots of bare soil. And of course, the one thing that soil doesn't like is being exposed to the elements. And anyway, you know, it's the most, as you said in the introduction right at the start, is you know, it's just the most important thing that you have. I mean, if your soil isn't good, then nothing's going to grow well in the garden. And roses do like half decent soil. So if your soil isn't in good shape, if the plant or the rose isn't going to be happy, so plant them. And of course, you can't say, well, you plant them 18 inches apart or 24 inches apart or whatever. It depends on your climate, it depends on your variety. But plant them so that they at least sort of start touching them, so there's not a lot of bare soil. That was a great thing when I joined David Austin's, was he was a great one for planting in threes. It doesn't have to be threes, you know, but he always said most Austin roses you should plant them about 18 inches apart. This is the UK climate. So they grew together to form the effect of one large bush. So of course it depends on the size of your border. If you've got a great big border, then you might want to plant 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or even 10, you know, in a group. But if you've got only a very small border, then one is absolutely fine. But if you do plant them in groups, try and plant them closely enough together so they grow together to create the effect of one large bush, and then you prune them in the same way as well. And then maybe a further gap between the next plant and the next variety, so you can still sort of squeeze into to deadhead and weed and put fertilizer on and whatever.
Yeah, I remember that was a great tip that I learned from you years ago, was, like you said, you know, plant them in if you have space, obviously, plant them in multiples, and then treat them as one large plant. If you have like 3 or 4, don't prune this one individually, this one individually, this one individually. Treat them like one giant plant, so you can't really see where one begins and one ends. And I'm with you. I mean, you know, don't expose the soil. First of all, you got to make a decision. You either have a rose garden or you have a mulch garden. You got to kind of like choose between the two there. Which one do you want to be focusing on?
I tell you one thing quickly, Paul. I went to visit my daughter in Colorado a couple of years ago, and we wanted some stone. So we went to this yard where they sold all sort of soil and mulching material and stone and gravel and all that sort of, and they had different coloured mulches.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I know. Designer mulches. Matches your outfit.
Reds and blue.
Yeah, and I think to myself, you know, I mean, what are they putting in that mulch in turn to dye it that color? And do I want that in my soil? That's the other thing that I think about. But I'm with you. I mean, if you have to have a colored mulch to make your garden look good, you're kind of missing the point here. You know? I think at that point in time. So, you know, air circulation, no, you don't. I mean, I think some of it came out about with planting them far apart was some of the roses, certainly in the United States at least, and I'm going to go 70s, 80s, and 90s, were not particularly disease resistant. So maybe that applied. Also, people who exhibited roses, and I feel like I'm picking on exhibitors, and I'm not. But they needed them far because they didn't want them bumping against each other because they're raising the flower to take to a rose show. So I get that.
And also, they want to be able to walk all around them to sort of mollycoddle them. And I'm the same about the people who show roses. I absolutely don't want to be rude about them because I think actually they're brilliant people. Anybody who talk
about hard workers.
Yeah, completely obsessed about growing monstrous onions or cauliflowers or dahlias or chrysanthemums or roses. I think they're brilliant. It takes all sorts to do the world. I don't want to do it myself. But having said that, we've planted some onions that are a variety of onion that's going to grow sort of big like this. Actually, fun to see what happens this year.
You can put them in the. It's never. I mean, I admire people who do it. I know the work that goes into it. I think horticulture. We've learned a lot from people who exhibit whatever they exhibit, be it tomatoes or onions or roses or whatever the case may be. But that was their space. The roses are space for a specific reason. So the air circulation again. We talked about this earlier. Pick a rose that's right for your climate. Make sure it's got a natural disease resistance for your climate. Those are the basic things that you want to be working for. But the air circulation, you don't need that for roses that are really healthy and prone to begin with. So don't worry so much about that. Which brings me to the next thing. So we have roses, and we're going to have our rose garden over here. And you talked about, your parents or your grandparents, they had a garden and they had the rose garden, and it was always sort of a separate thing. It's over there, and don't plant. And I think one of the great things that David Austin taught American rose growers is that these roses are meant to be planted with other plants, perennials and shrubs and the like. And there's that's just a beauty all its own, isn't it? When you plant them with other perennials and shrubs.
I think it actually enhances them. They turn out much more beautiful. So, and it's not just perennials, of course, it's annuals and biennials as well. People forget about annuals. There's lots of ugly annuals around, but there are some very beautiful ones. I mean, one of my favorites is one called Phacelia tanacitifolia, and it's a native of America, the States. And do you know it?
I don't know it. No.
Oh,
I'll be honest with you. I'm not real strong on Latin names. I will be honest with you.
Okay.
If it's called Bob or something, I might know it. But
Phacelia it's Phacelia, and there's 2-3 species that are grown in the States. I'm trying to remember the common name for it, but I can't remember now. But anyway, it's a member of the borage family, and it's got a blue flower. It's incredibly attractive to bees and other insects, and it flowers very, very quickly from seed. And if it self-seeds itself around the place, and if it gets a bit out of hand, it's the easiest thing to pull up. And in a milder climate like here in the UK, it will just about overwinter as well. So some annuals, things like cosmos and nigella are beautiful as well. And
those are gorgeous plants. Yeah,
foxgloves and mulleins.
Yeah, I mean foxgloves are biannual, and that's a classic pairing with roses, needless to say. And there's some salvias that will self-seed as well. I have a salvia cucina, which is red. That self-seeded everywhere. It was absolutely beautiful. So, and that actually, that self-seeding kind of adds sort of a natural look to it. You get almost this prairie kind of meadowy look going with the rose garden, because things are just, and like you said, they pop up everywhere, but if you need to edit a little bit, they pop out of the ground pretty easy.
Well, that's the crucial thing, actually, is if things start growing right around the base of the rose, then that's when you've got to get in there and oik them out, because roses really don't like things like foxgloves. They have a big root system. Lady's mantle and things like that, Alchemilla mollis. Just a lot of the geraniums, if they grow right around the base of the rose, they're going to be sucking out all the goodness and moisture out of the ground. The rose isn't going to like that at all. So
you have an expression that I've always loved, is you always say, well, some perennials can be thugs.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're thugs of pretty flowers.
Yeah, exactly. They want to absolutely take over your roses, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, plant other plants with roses, and you know, I've talked a lot about in previous you know, episodes of the Everyday Rose Show with, in fact, with Rebecca Corradum and stuff. We talked about contrast in the garden, and contrast is not just contrast of color; it's contrast of shape.
Yeah.
You know, and so you mentioned, you know, so things that, you know, roses tend to be round, and I'm being general here, but you know, say
And big
the bushes.
flowers.
Yeah, exactly. But if you've got things that have, you know, like a foxglove that has more of an upright, spiky type of
Yeah.
flower, you know,
Yeah.
now you've got that wonderful contrast going on there.
Yeah. And then you've got catmints, you know, we've got millions of tiny little flowers.
Love catmint. Yeah.
And then things like verbena bonaerensis as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And of course, it's a way of introducing blue into the color scheme. And so you've got all, you know, delphiniums, campanulas, some of the geraniums and things like that. They go for any coloured rose. They look superb, whether it's a yellow, pink, or red, or whatever colour.
Yeah, I mean, blue is such a great complementary color to roses because there are no naturally blue roses. I mean, there are roses that are getting maybe towards mauve or something like that, but I think there generally tends to be shades of red. And but yeah, the blue and silver, you know, foliage, you know, your lavenders and your artemisias and things like that also just set the roses off. Oh, they just make them pop.
Yeah. Stachys lanata, the lamb's ears, is absolutely beautiful.
Oh yes, yeah. I just put a bunch of those in my garden for the first time this year. Yeah, you know, you have those moments where you sit there and you go, I look at it and I walk through and well, look, there's lamb's ears. I don't have lamb's ears in my garden. What am I thinking? So, you know, I grabbed a bunch and chucked them in, and they're doing beautifully, and they're, you know, front of the border, and just that wonderful kind of let them spill on the lawn a little bit kind of.
Absolutely, yeah, break up the edge. The crucial thing about choosing plants to grow with roses is to get the best effect, they should flower at the same time. You know, it's no good if your perennial or whatever flowers 2 or 3 weeks before the rose. You know, it's okay, but the really magical effect is when you get them flowering side by side, and then you the contrast between the two, or the complementary. And then, of course, the secret is to find out whether they do work together is to pick a flower one and then carry it round and offer it up to other flowers. You know, some of them will look, you know, colors will clash or just won't look good. Others will say, oh yeah, it's okay. But others will just, oh gosh, you know, perfect color to go with the rose, or you carry the rose around. And so then that gives you a hint about what to plant next to your roses.
Yeah, and that's like you said, that's one of the joys. Like you said, you know, just take your flowers or your roses and move around the garden, and what about this and what about that combination, and see how they work. And it's you know, I've got my garden right now. I'm coming into flowering, and I do have some summer flowering perennials because my roses will shut down in the summertime, and that kind of runs my garden. But I've got a longer season than you do. I mean, you know, my season is I mean, my early perennials and stuff are like mid-April, and my garden really won't shut down until November. Is the season that I've got. And I can grow tea roses too, by the way, which another reason to make you jealous. But but I've actually got a plant that I've talked about on the show before, which is called Penstemon Husker's Red. I don't know if you're familiar with this plant or not.
I know
it's a Penstemon. You're familiar. Yeah, it's a Penstemon which you're familiar with. It's upright, very upright, maybe meter for me, about 3.5 feet. It's got elongated bronze foliage. That's the first thing I adore about this thing. And then it does these beautiful spikes of white blooms that set off and just carry, you never need staking, just a very upright. And right now my roses are in bloom, and they're in peak bloom as well. So I've got this white flower, the bronze foliage against the bronze foliage of the new roses. And there's just a whole lot going on that all sort of knits together with this plant.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing, is actually people don't think about the color of the young foliage of roses. Some of the most beautiful. I mean, the best one is Lady Emma Hamilton, which has got sort of a tangerine orangey flower, fantastic fragrance. But the young growth on that is just amazing. And a few years ago, we had it growing next to a wallflower, a dark red wallflower. And the color combination of that with the young foliage of the roses was just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, that also gets back to what we talked about earlier with rose blooms that actually go through a coloration change.
Yeah.
So you can not only have, you can have, the Lady Emma Hamilton with the color that it has to begin with, and then it moves through its color variations. But then the foliage is also moving through its color variations. So
Yeah.
now you've got contrast in color and foliage in color. You've got contrast in bloom color, and you've just got a plant that's just giving you a lot of bang for your buck at that point.
Yeah.
When it comes to pruning, certainly here in the U.S., what we've always been sort of like the norm has always been, 18 inches high, outward facing bud eye. And there's a reason for that. There's a purpose. That's if you want to grow the rose to get the long stem hybrid tea flower. That's why you would prune that way. But when you get into garden roses, Michael, as you've always talked about, there's a whole different approach.
Yeah, I think you've got to be quite broad-minded about it. I mean, you could have the same variety growing in two different places in your garden, and you might prune them in a completely different way. So in one part of the garden, you might want to prune it quite hard and keep it quite short. Another part of the garden, you want it a taller plant, and you want it much taller, so you prune much more lightly. So the first thing you do when you stand in front of your rose and you want to prune it, you ask yourself that question: what do I want that rose to do in that position? And then it might be growing too tall. Okay, well then you've got to prune it harder. You've got to go back, back maybe down to 18 inches. 18 inches is not necessarily a bad thing at all. It could be exactly the right thing to do. Of course, it depends on the varieties. So the miniatures and the patios and things like that. You might want to, you've got to prune those really hard back. Actually, the old tradition for growing the hybrid teas in this country was you prune them down to about 4 inches.
Wow.
And actually, the one good thing about that, I mean, it's not something I'd ever do, but it's one good thing about that. It's I compare it to if you've got gangrene. Then you cut off your arm to save the rest of you.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
It's actually where a lot of the disease overwinters. And so in the old varieties, which were much more disease prone, it's actually a way of physically getting rid of the disease. You put it on your bonfire and then you had much less disease around it. But nowadays, I think people are much more into attractively shaped shrub roses. And you often want flowers to go, from the ground up to the top, really. And so then it's a matter of, say, just deciding how tall you want that plant to be in that position. A very good general rule is down to about halfway. And I say that a lot, if you just chop it in half, literally in half, you'll see if the top of the flower, top of the stem was sort of 5 foot high, cut it down to 2'6". Actually, that's a very good starting point, and you'll probably get very good results. But according to what you want that plant to do, maybe somewhere between 1/3 and 2/3 is also a very good general rule to work at.
Yeah, I mean, the expression I always use is "What's the rose's job in the garden?" And I think you can use a traditional, English style border, front of border, mid of border, back of border. If it's in the back of the border, you want it to be tall because it needs to be seen against the mid and front border plants. But if it's screening something, then you want it to be tall. If it's running along the sidewalk, perhaps you want it a bit shorter or something like that. Yeah. And I like your idea, 1/3 to 2/3 or a half. And sometimes a nice way to prune is rather than try to get the real fussy stuff. I mean, I always start with dead, diseased, and dying. Those are the obviously things that need to come out of any plant. And then take it down by half, and then begin to work with it and finesse it from there. Is a really nice way to prune without getting really, really fussy about it. So I'm with you, just prune by its job in the garden. I mean, a rule of thumb tends to be the higher you prune, I think the more flowers you tend to get. So that's something to keep in mind.
Smaller flowers. Smaller flowers. Yeah.
Which
can be very nice.
And smaller flowers, absolutely. Yeah. But I think what you just said, I mean, stand in front of it, what do I want you to do? What do I want you to be when you grow up again? And that's going to give you a nice analogy to it. So let's talk about some of the other things too. They talk about an outward facing bud eye, and no. I see a head shake coming on.
I suppose it's partly because I've always got so much to do, and the thought of spending hours searching for that outward pointing bud to me is just, oh gosh, it's so boring and just such a waste of time. So I also like to prune before the buds are really showing. I think if you start pruning when the buds are already starting to grow, maybe they're an inch long or something like that, then it's actually almost too late. And
yeah, I'd agree with that.
Because you're wasting the plant's energy, and then you start getting distracted by these buds, and you say, oh no, I can't possibly cut this. It's such a beautiful looking bud. I can't cut it off. And so then you end up with a plant that's sort of all over the place. Whereas what you want to achieve really is a sort of fairly, on most roses anyway, not necessarily on the old roses, a nice, attractively rounded shape, and then that encourages flowers all the way around. So if you start looking for outward pointed buds, it's a very tedious way, I think, of pruning your roses. And I don't.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think you can end up with. I think you can end up with, like you said, you sit there and say, okay, here's my nice. I've got this nice shape going on, but the outward facing bud eye's down here, and then the other outward facing bud eye is up here, and then you get the. And the other reason I actually don't necessarily always go for an outward facing bud eye to get this kind of shape is the definition of a garden rose. We've talked about it's an attractive plant.
Yeah.
Well, that means it does not have a hollow middle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is that old thing about pruning. You hear about, hollow out the middle of the bush. I mean, that's then you've got. I always imagine it as being, if you look at the rose from above, you've got this nice coliseum of flowers with the centurions in the middle running around. It's just,
anyway, as soon as the rose sees a bit of daylight, it's just going to grow towards it. I mean, they're going to naturally space themselves. They're not going to. They don't really want to grow absolutely cheek by jowl. They'd rather sort of space themselves out naturally. Yeah. So unless you've got one of things like compassion or something like that has stems, or of the HEs, stems like sort of steel rods. They're going to adapt themselves and make it nicely rounded.
Yeah, they'll find their air. I mean, obviously, if you've got kings that are cluttering up the middle and crossing and rubbing against each other, that's some common sense. But you don't need to hollow out the middle of a rose. I mean, you want that nice mushroom cap of flowers, and you're not going to get that by hollowing out the middle of the thing. Talk about pruning at an angle. There's your bud eye. You want to prune. If your eye is here, growing out here, you want to put it at a 45-degree angle, facing away from the bud eye.
Again, to me, the life's too short.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, I see people out there I imagine people out there with like a protractor or an angle, speed square, saying, okay, I got to get this just right. Okay, look, I pruned a bud eye, and it took an hour. I got to go back in now and take a break around.
But why prunes angle? And some people say that it's because water doesn't sit on the top. Well, even if it's at 45 degrees, it's still going to sit on top. And what's wrong with water sitting on top of the cut stem?
No, and the other one I heard too is that if you prune it this way, the sap might run over and cover the bud eye, and the bud eye won't grow. And I'm like, I'm sorry, how long have roses been around? And they figured out how to grow through sap running on their bud eye.
But the reason why it originally people decided that pruning at angles should be done is because in the old days, before secateurs were invented, you had pruning knives.
Okay.
And with a pruning knife, you can't cut straight across. You've got to slice it.
Sure.
And so that was the old traditional way of cutting it. It was you sliced it up, you cut it at an angle, and so then oh gosh, that's how you must cut your stems.
I did not know that. That's funny. That's funny. So now instead of saying if you prune it at an angle, instead of saying no, I'm being classically correct is what I'm actually basically. No. I didn't know. That's actually fascinating. I didn't know that. But yeah, I'm with you. Just I just go through and I just prune. I try to get just above a bud eye, but I'm not worried about inward or outward facing. If it's obviously facing away from the center, I'll go for it. But I'm just looking to shape and trim the plant.
Yeah. And then the other thing, of course, is the distance above the bud. So the books say, I don't know if it's quarter of an inch or an eighth of an inch.
Quarter of an inch is generally, that's what I always read.
But I think that's life's too short for me to worry about that. And I think in the olden days, that some varieties they would get dieback, and of course, if you're fanatical about your roses, that's bad, and I can understand that. But actually, a lot of modern roses, they're really tough roses. They don't die back at all, and if they do, they'll just die back to the next bud, and that's it. And then I said this to one person not so long ago, and she said, "But I know they're there."
Get rid of the whole concept of pruning season, and the fact that you trim your roses all year long, so go ahead and, in pruning season, that's when you want to take them down maybe a third or 2/3 or whatever, and do the things we were talking about earlier. And then, but during the season when you're deadheading or walking through the garden or whatever, if you see a little, that's where you kind of clean them all season long. Don't think that just because I can cut them with my secateurs during pruning season, then I can't touch them again. You can do it all year.
I think that's. I'm not sure. In this climate, I'm not sure I would go down that line. Some very vigorous roses I might do, but But on the whole, I would just deadhead. But yeah, some varieties can get very tall later on this evening. Even this
I wouldn't prune them. I wouldn't. If I had a tall variety that I took by, like, let's say I took it down by half in the pruning season time or late winters when I do it, when the forsythia blooms. I might not, instead of deadheading, maybe like, to the first 5 leaflet leaf set or something like that, which may be 6 inches, maybe I'll take it down 8 inches.
Yeah.
Just to get a little bit of, keep working it all season long, during taking advantage of deadheading to kind of shape the bush all season long.
And the thing to remember on pruning, of course, is that the once flowering old roses don't want to be pruned too hard.
Yes.
So you always got to remember that the once flowering old roses actually, the modern rose, the repeat flowering rose, you can prune it down to 2 inches and it would still flower that year. Yeah. Whereas the old roses, the once flowering old roses, if you did that, you get no flowers at all, because they only flower on the older stems. On the previous year, the stem is at least a year old, and so what I was talking about, what we were talking about earlier on, was the old once flowering roses are characters, and if you start pruning them too hard, you might get a lot of flowers, but actually then you lose out on character. So
I agree.
Down to that thing of, what do you want that plant to do in that position?
But what I'll do after the spring flowering roses, that's when I might take an old cane out right after they flower, to start rejuvenating some new growth from the base, which will then by next year, like you said, will be set up and ready to go.
Yeah, and that's something that is absolutely crucial, actually, is that I'll do in the winter over here, is to take out the old tired stems. So, unlike us human beings, we just improve with age. Roses like to stay young.
There's one half of the 2 old duffers.
And so that's a very important thing to do, is to identify the older stems, which are looking a bit old and tired and just worn out. Cut them right out at ground level. And roses are absolutely amazing. You have this woodiest old stems, and you think, well, where's a new bud going to come from? But they do. They shoot out this old stem from this woody old, barky old stem. So don't be scared about it. Cut out those older stems to encourage new young growth from the base.
Yeah, and that's a very important point, because that's one thing I think, particularly with people who are new to roses and kind of particularly when you start getting into some of these, like you said, the shrub roses and the old roses and things like that, they're scared to do it. And once you do it and you see the results, and don't cut a lot of old stems out at once. What you might do is cut out one, and then gauge your reaction from that. Just sort of dip your toe in the water initially before you get brave enough to really go at it. But you will be rewarded with new basil breaks. I mean, I did it this year. I've actually done some of the videos I've done so far. My Rev d'Or, which is a beautiful old noisette that I've got. I cut one. I mean, the cane must have been this big around. The cover with wood, wasn't doing anything. I have now six 6 new basil breaks from that thing.
Yeah.
You know, and 2 of them are already about 4 feet high, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
So so you can do that. So don't be afraid to cut out the old canes. And I want to. Michael, now I really want to dive into something, because this is something you hear back and forth. At least I'm getting it a lot in like my Facebook discussion group, which pruning young roses. You know, be they bare root, be they own root, be they container, be they whatever they may happen to be. So, you know, let's talk a little bit about, you know, what should you do with a young rose? You know, my feeling is a light hand.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on how well they grow, really. You know, if it's growing away really strongly, then you might want to prune it down to halfway. But if it's, you know, if it's struggling a bit, then give it a light hand. What you don't want to do, you hear that sometimes. Oh, my plant, my rose isn't growing at all well. I'll chop it down to the ground. You know, effectively what you're doing there is getting it to start all over again. It's got to use up a lot of energy. There won't have any leaves, and so that's the last thing you should do. I mean, if the rose isn't growing well, that's probably because you didn't plant it well. It's not in the right soil. It's not in the right position, or something like that. So then, what you should do is maybe dig it up and plant it somewhere else, just to assess what the reason is. You know, you haven't put fertilizer on, or it's too wet or too dry, or something like that. So yes, but that first pruning sort of decides what size it's going to be, but nothing's irredeemable in the rose world. So, you know, if you make a mistake in the first year, you prune it too lightly, then you can easily prune it back harder the following year. So it's that's the great thing about roses, is that you can apply some very general basic rules about it and still get really good results. But then as you get to know your rose and get more experience, then you can get even better results. But actually, I always say, just by absolutely basic pruning, you'll still, you know, you're 75% of the way there. And
you can read a whole lot of different things about rose care and how to care for them. Some get incredibly complicated, some get fairly simple. Michael, let's start with disease, and this whole thing about if your rose has disease on it, if you get a bit of black spot, by gosh, you've now failed, and you're going to be run out of the rose club, and you'll never be allowed to grow roses again, because you're a complete rosarian failure because your roses got disease. And silly,
Well, I always think that we all get, us humans, we all get a few pests and diseases ourselves, you know, and hopefully not too many pests, but certainly a few diseases, and we're not immediately...
I won't get lice, that's a good thing.
We, you know, hopefully it's nothing too serious, and we do survive. So a few black spots or a bit of mildew or whatever on the rose, as long as it doesn't completely defoliate it and look absolutely as ugly as sin, then that's fine. So that's what you.
I'm with you on that too. Yeah, a little disease, and you know, you get a bit of black spot, and something I think to think about too is that, you know, if a rose does defoliate, which you just mentioned, perhaps it's not the right rose for your climate or for your garden. You know, it doesn't mean it's a bad rose. It means maybe it's not a good rose for you necessarily. So it starts with picking healthy plants.
Yeah, or maybe it's not. I mean, maybe it's not a good rose in that position. Or the other thing is, which I get quite often actually, you're not looking after it right. One of the classic things is watering. You know, if you water in the evening and the leaves stay wet all night, that's the absolutely best way of encouraging black spot on your roses. So, you know, if you do want to water your roses, I would try not to get the leaves wet, or water in the morning when the leaves can dry up quickly. So don't go around with a hose pipe and a glass of wine in your hand at the end of the day. You know, the black spot will thank you very much for that.
This is true. Yeah, while you're sipping your wine, the black spot's going good. He's boozing up. We're in good shape here.
But everything will get a bit of disease. Even the super healthy ones will get. And actually, sometimes a black spot on a rose might not necessarily be black spot. You know, it could just be a bit of physical damage or something else. So
it could be a little bit of fertilizer burned. It could be a little bit of something. You know, it could be the sun hitting it too hard or something along those lines. And Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, let them be imperfect. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that,
Yeah.
and like you said, if it defoliates completely, that's a whole different beast. But then, like you said, look at the horticultural conditions, look at the variety. If we're going to talk about rose care, to me, it starts literally from the ground up. No pun intended.
Crucial. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The soil is just it's just the most important thing, and people ignore it. They think, oh well, it's just. I mean, you have this horrible term in the States. We call it dirt, which really upsets
me.
And then some people over here are starting to
something you wipe off your shoe as you come in the door.
And some people over here are starting to call it mud. So that really upsets me as well. Soil is just the most important stuff, and you've got to do whatever you can to look after it, to make it as happy as possible. And actually, in the States, you're very good because you're great believers in mulching, and that's actually one of the best ways of looking after your soil, protecting it from the elements, encouraging all the millions of different microorganisms and not so small organisms that live in the soil. So the more you have the more you have of those, the healthier the soil will be, and the better the rose will grow.
Yeah, we do mulch a lot in the States, and it keeps the moist soil, kind of a nice even moisture and even temperature. It doesn't bake hard. We talked about that earlier in the show. And you talk about all the mycorrhizae and the living organisms that are breaking down the organic material that's in the soil. And a tip that I always tell people is if you put mulch down in February, for example, whatever time of year you put it down, if the following February, if that mulch has not broken down and gone away, your soil's not alive.
Oh, yeah. Well, it depends. I mean, I always remember going to, I can't remember where, somewhere in California, big garden, and they put on, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 inches of wood chips on it. And you sort of, I burrowed down a bit to get down to the soil level. And the interface between the soil and the wood chips was great, it just gradually rotting down. So, I mean, in this country,
that's what you want.
We tend to say don't put too much mulch on, but actually I've seen it to be very, very effective in the States. And the great thing about something like a thick layer of mulch or wood chips, if you start trampling around on the soil, which you have to go and to mulch and to prune and weed and things like that, then you're compacting the soil, and that's one thing that soil hates, is being compacted.
Yes.
Especially
because you're taking all the oxygen and water channels out of the soil.
Absolutely.
And that's the worst thing you can do for your plants.
Yeah, and if you've got a thick layer of mulch on it, wood chips or whatever, then it's going to be protecting it from being compacted.
I had about 2 years ago in my garden, I had an odd year 2 summers ago, and one of the things I noticed was that my mulch, I don't do a thick layer, but I noticed it wasn't breaking down. And so I did some leaf mold and some compost, some things like that to bring and I saw it was like that, the difference that it made in the garden. And it wasn't the plants, it wasn't anything I was doing. It's just the soil I hadn't been paying enough attention, I guess, for lack of a better word.
In this country, people are obsessed about rose replant disease, and every single lecture that I give, people ask.
Well, we get that here. Oh, yeah, we get it here too. Don't if you've had a rose there, don't plant a rose there until at least the next millennium. But there's a magic solution, isn't there, Michael? What about the cardboard box solution? I know you love this one.
Yes. I mean, she's not around, but Rosie actually is a great believer in the cardboard box. I just can't see what a cardboard box is going to do. To me, rose replant disease is just a symptom of a completely worn out soil. So, if you sort of have a mental image of a rose bed where it hasn't been mulched, the rose has been there for 30, 40 years or whatever, and it's been trampled to death by sort of generations of gardeners. That soil is biologically dead. It's compacted. So if you just dig up a rose and then try and just plant a new one without doing some improvements, that rose is just going to say, no way, I'm not going to grow in this horrible stuff. And most other plants won't either. So, you know, if you've got to look after your soil on an ongoing basis. And I always remember this was asked many years ago at a little conference we had at the nursery, David Austin's, and so I gave my 2 pennyworth. And then a chap who was at that time the top shower of roses in the country, he said, well, I'd like to give my opinion on this. And I thought, oh God, she's going to disagree with me. But in fact, he completely agreed with me. And he obviously looked after his soil beautifully, and put a really good layer of mulch on every year. And he said, well, if I want to change a rose, I just dig it up and then bung a new one in. No hassle at all. So it's all about looking after your soil as well as possible, and the secret to that really is mulch.
I just make sure that I'm constantly feeding my soil, and that that helps ward off disease and helps ward off fungus. I live with a little fungus. I know you're happy to live with a little fungus, and at the end of the day, if a rose just defoliates and defoliates and defoliates, my solution is a shovel at that point.
I love that. I love that American phrase of shovel pruning.
Shovel pruning, yeah. and I tell you right now, you will not get a 45-degree angle with a shovel pruning.
But the other great thing to remember about a rose that does defoliate every time is that it's a source of infection. So it's going, it's spreading its spores around to everything else, and so everything else, even though it might be quite a disease-resistant rose, if it's completely overwhelmed by spores from its neighbor, then it's bound to get a bit more disease. But if all of your roses are relatively healthy in your garden, then everything is going to stay healthy. So any badly diseased roses, shovel prune them.
Yeah, I'm with you. Just that's the simple thing, and just learn to live with a little black spot. It's okay, It's we've got 2 folks here are quote rose experts are saying it's okay to get some black spot or powdery mildew or rust. It's not the end of the world. Michael and I won't come visit your garden and make you rip up all your roses. We promise.
Remember that powdery mildew is actually often a symptom of dryness at the roots.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. So
that throws back to what you talked about with watering.
Yeah. So But
that ties into what we talked about. Good horticultural practices will help ward off disease. Feed your soil. Make sure they're watered. Make sure your pH is okay so it can uptake the nutrients. Do those basic things, and then a good rose that's disease resistant by nature will flourish in your garden with no trouble at all.
Yeah. Although it's not just pH, of course. It's the other nutrients. 2 nutrients are very important.
Oh, yes.
Phosphate and potash.
Yeah.
And because a lot of people tend to put on too much fertilizer, and then the phosphate and potash levels go absolutely sky high. And if you go that high, then the plant will suffer. And it takes years and years and years and years for that phosphate and potash levels to gradually go down. So if your roses aren't doing well, try and get the analyze for pH and phosphate and potash.
And the soil. And a good soil sample will not only analyze the pH, a good soil sample, you send it to a lab, which is what I tend to do. Most people, I always advise, you'll get like you said, you'll get your potash, all your micronutrients, you'll get an amazing recipe, basically, and they'll even tell you what you should or shouldn't do with that. And that actually takes me to 2 things that I want to kind of bounce back to. We talked about planting, at least in America. You always get this. Whenever you plant a rose, always put bone meal in the bottom of the hole. And always feed with Epsom salts. And my reaction is, if you're putting in bone meal, have you done it? Do you need bone meal in your soil? That's number 1. Epsom salts is magnesium sulfate. Well, if your magnesium levels are through the roof, why are you adding more? That's, know what you're doing before you just automatically do it because it says in some book you're supposed to do this.
No, it's best just to add plenty of organic matter to the soil before planting. And then when you apply the fertilizer in sort of spring and summer, then apply what it says on the packet. So if it says 3 ounces or whatever per rose, and apply 3 ounces and measure it out.
Yeah,
Of
yeah, yeah.
scales.
Right.
Don't,
Yeah, I
and
know.
then
3 ounces is
scatter
good.
it
6
around
ounces would be
nicely.
twice as good. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's
So
not. And 9 ounces is not 3 times as good.
no,
It's not. You know, it's like taking, you know, medicine. You know, if I take a
yeah,
medication, you know, if I take twice as much, well, no, that might kill you.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, be
absolutely.
careful with that. I know what you mean. So, yeah. Yeah, so learn to live with a little bit of disease, and I think the same comes with insects and insects, you know, damage, quote unquote. And you know, you know, yeah, I get insects, I get aphids, and I get the things that I normally get. But I'm willing to live with a little damage. And for me personally, the reason I'm willing to do it is because I know that's going to bring my beneficial insects in, and that's going to be my balance that's going to be going
Absolutely.
on in that garden. So
Absolutely.
I won't spray my aphids because I know that means the hoverflies, the ladybugs, and whatever your native insect is going to not show up if you spray and kill all those aphids.
Absolutely. No, I absolutely so agree. We're very lucky in the UK. I mean, our worst pest really is aphids. I know you get a
Okay.
few nasty ones in the States.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we've got sawfly and thrips and the whole 9 yards. But
Japanese beetles and yeah.
yeah. Yeah, well, and the Japanese beetles, you know, I mean, they're not native, so there is no native enemy for the Japanese beetles.
Yeah.
You know, and the only thing that, well, what you hear about when you're supposed to use Japanese beetles, it's called Sevin dust, Sevin.
Right.
Well, if you look at the label on, have you heard of this product, Sevin?
Vaguely.
Yeah, well, if you look at the labels, it kills. It's very proudly kills over 530 different kinds of insects. Oh boy, that's not good. You know, I rarely give an absolute, you know, but my absolute is don't use Sevin. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for beneficials. It's bad for pollinators. It's bad for butterflies.
Yeah.
What I do with the Japanese beetles, I mentioned earlier in the show, and I'm going to digress a little here, Michael. I know this isn't your bailiwick, but since I've got an American audience to a degree with this thing, they come in July and August.
Right.
And July and August is when I get hot and humid in South Carolina. And that's when most of where the beetles come, that tends to be the climate. My roses actually shut down a little bit.
Right.
It's one of the reasons I've got summer blooming perennials. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. So in the summertime is when I do sort of a summer cleanup when the beetles are here. Again, dead, disease, and dying. I might bring the roses down a little bit. And I'm basically setting them up for the fall flowering. I've also learned, and there was one particular agastache called Agastache Blue Fortune that I planted in the garden. And I walked out there one day. It was covered in Japanese beetles, and the roses nearby had far less beetles than I normally would expect to see because they were all in that agastache. Well, the agastache grows so quickly, it didn't even matter. So I basically do that in the summertime, and then the beetles leave about the time that my roses wake up again for my fall blooming. So with a non-native insect, what's the rhythm of your garden? What's the rhythm of that insect? And try not to work against it, and try not to use poisons. And that's my lecture, and that's my lecture.
And I know you're putting up a lot of bird boxes as well to try and attract as many birds in as possible.
Yes, yeah. I've had bluebirds are very popular in our part of the world. They're native, and supposedly they eat Japanese beetles like crazy. I've actually put them in the bed itself, as a matter of fact. I've got the bird boxes in the bed, purple martins. And part of what I talk about, we talk about beneficial insects, and I always tell people it's a reverse kind of process to figure this out. We talk about perennials. A lot of perennials are incredibly important for beneficial insects, particularly for the adults. So, you know, you mentioned aphids in England. Okay, so that's your pest in England. So what is your native insect that likes to feed on aphids?
Yeah.
And then what does that native insect want? It's food, water, shelter, the 3 things it's going to want. The food is going to be, you know, perennials. The shelters could be rough foliage, could be wood piles. Water's water, clean source of water. And then build that environment. And it's kind of like, you know, if you build it, the beneficials will show up. And that's my own garden is a classic example of that. You know, I get aphids? I get some. Do I get thrips? Almost never, even though I live in thrip country. And my garden's organic.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, my theory is I invite everybody to come into the garden.
Yes.
and they sort it out themselves,
including people.
and it works absolutely brilliantly. It's you
Yeah.
know, I mean, in the 35 odd years or longer now that I've been growing roses, just literally once or twice I've seen a bit of a bad outbreak of aphids on it, but I've never felt the need. I've never sprayed. I've never felt the need to spray at all. And if there was a really bad outbreak and the roses starting to suffer, I'd either squash them with my fingers or just give them a good bashing with my hand, and most of them will drop on the ground, and then they'll
if I get a really bad outbreak for 1 year for whatever reason, and that's what happens in nature, you know, I might, you know, like you said, squash them or flick some off or something like that. But I always make sure I leave enough behind.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so it's that, you know, if you get a little out of whack, try to restore that balance a little bit. Basically, what I'm trying to do at that point.
That's the thing, is always these things, they go up and down, you know, and so you're going to get outbreaks sometimes, and then other times you won't get anything at all. And always nature has this brilliant way of balancing it out, and sometimes goes out of kilter, but then it soon restores itself. So the more you interfere, the worse it's going to get. I always remember, you know, when I first went out to work in the tropics on the oil palm estate in Sabah, on the island of Borneo, they'd had dreadful problems with caterpillar eating the oil palm, and so they spent millions and millions of dollars on plain spraying it and everything. It just got worse and worse and worse. Then they got an entomologist in along to sort of try and see how they could be cured. And he said, stop spraying. So they did that, and within a short space of time, everything had gone and rebalanced. You know, just let nature, don't get worried about these things. Don't let nature take its course, and practically every single time it'll sort itself out.
Yeah, I always say my philosophy is, you know, nature has figured all this stuff out. And I think the best thing we can do as gardeners, we're caretakers as much as we are anything else. And I think the best thing we can do as gardeners is, okay, nature's figured this out. So then go educate yourself and say, okay, what would nature do in a situation like that? And then how can you enhance it, not control it? Yeah. How can you enhance that? How can you set nature up to do what nature wants to do extremely well? So a lot of gardening to me is getting out of the way and letting nature do its thing.
Yeah, you're never going to beat nature.
No.
Nature will always win out.
So we'll look out. So Michael, this has been a great conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of fun stuff. And I want to kind of flip back to the beginning a little bit, since we talked about rose myth busting a little bit in this, and we've done a little bit of that. We've also, I hope, given some people some tools in their gardener's tool belt to move forward with this. But so this is something I'd like you to talk and just go head on with this thing. You know, you're kind of classic about this, and the way you talked about roses from the beginning from your parents. You know, you weren't really that enamored of them. Perhaps you had heard that they took a lot of work, or you saw your parents or grandparents doing an enormous amount of work to take care of them. You know, you saw your wife's Portia, you kind of got in with David Austin. So for the folks that are watching this and who say, oh, gosh, I've heard roses are difficult. I've heard they're complicated. What's the Michael Marriott on that?
I think they're some of the easiest plants to grow, and especially if you think about how much they give back to you. You know, it's very easy to argue they're the most garden-worthy of all plants, because you think about during the year what you have to do to them. You know, you plant them, okay, you spend a bit of time on preparing the soil and planting them, and then you give them a bit of fertilizer during the summer. Maybe you deadhead, maybe you don't have to deadhead. Depends on the variety. Some clean themselves very, very, very nicely. Then you go around and prune them in the winter. That takes a few minutes, and for that, you know, you're adding a bit of fertilizer during the summer. That takes sort of 10-15 minutes. You're pruning them in the winter. It takes 10-15 minutes. Maybe a bit of deadheading, and you've got flowers from, well, depending on your climate, you could have flowers 12 months of the year, or in the UK you have flowers maybe 5 or 6 months of the year. There's just no other plant that has can give you so much, and then you get a beautiful individual flower and a fantastic fragrance. They're the most garden worthy of all plants, really. They're fantastic, much easier than perennials and things like that, which I mean, I love some perennials, but you know, they've got to be split. We love the bearded iris, you know, but they've got to be lifted and divided every 2, 3, 4 years or something like that. You know, roses, they're just dead easy and give you so much, and they mean so much to us in our culture. So it's not just, you know, a beautiful rose. They're just an important, very crucial part of our culture, and not just our culture in the Western world, but cultures all across Europe, all through Asia, and you know, China's been there. They probably loved the rose before we did over here. So yeah, it's a very special plant. The rose.